everyone, welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be talking about everything I read in the month of June. So if you don't know, in the month of June I participated in the Owl Readathon, so I'm going to be going over everything I read for the Owl Readathon, but I'm also going to talk about the few books that I read that weren't a part of the readathon. So this is my first wrap-up video, so I'm going to try and make it really interesting. I don't know. I'm obviously going to include my rating for each book and then talk about the synopsis of each of them, but I also want to include some other interesting information. So to avoid a super long intro, let's just go ahead and get started with the video. The first book I read was actually an e-arc that I got from NetGalley. It's available for anybody to download, and that was Stage Dreams by Melanie Gillman. I gave this book 4 stars. It is a graphic novel kind of set in the Wild West, and it follows our main character who is an outlaw, and she meets up with a transgender woman who is fleeing from home. And it's a very interesting story. It was super short. I really wish I had gotten to know the characters a little bit more, but from people who I've seen who are part of the LGBTQ plus community, they really liked this and they thought that it was really good in terms of representation and all that. I don't have a super strong synopsis on this just because I don't want to give too much away because it is so short, and then I also don't want to speak on other people's experience, so I can't really speak on the representation myself. I know Chandler talked about it. If I can find the video she talks about it in, I'll link it down below, which is how I found out about this, but it was really good and I really enjoyed it. Like I said, I gave it 4 stars. And that was the first book I read this month. So the first book I read for the readathon was Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire. I borrowed this from my library, so I no longer have a copy of it, but I gave this book 4 stars. This book follows a group of children who are now a part of this, I guess, boarding school, and they all once lived in this alternate realm where time moved differently and they lived a very different life than they would in the mortal world. And so it's kind of like they're sent there to have some sort of therapy to get them to move on from living in that past world. Again, I'm really bad at synopses on these. I really liked this. The first third of it was world building, and that's kind of where I struggled with that because it was so much of the world building that we were following. Though it was interesting to me, I know it's a series and I don't know that I'll continue on with it. It was also a little bit graphic at times, but for how short it was, it really packed a punch and it was really good and I really enjoyed it. I just don't know if I'll be continuing on with the rest of them. Next book I read in June was Siege and Storm by Leigh Bardugo. So this is part of what is now called the Shadow and Bone trilogy, what was originally called the Grisha trilogy when they were published with this cover. It follows our main character Alina Starkov, and it's set in the Grishaverse, and it was really good. I read the first book, Shadow and Bone, before June. I read it at the end of May. I wanted to pick this one up shortly thereafter. So I'm not going to talk about the synopsis of this one too much just because it'll give away the first one, but I'll talk about the first one a little bit in case you don't know what this one's about. So our story takes place in Ravka, which is this fictional world, a part of the Grishaverse. And in Ravka, there is a fold that has kind of taken over part of the land, and you can't go in there because it's completely dark, and there are beasts that are there, and so we follow Alina and Mal's regiment, and they are going into the fold, and she has to protect Mal, who is her childhood friend, and she finds out that she does have powers. She was tested when she was younger for these Grisha powers, but it's kind of just been hidden inside of her, and then all of a sudden it comes out. So she's having to learn how to live her new life as a Grisha and use her powers to help better the world in which she lives in. So I gave Shadow and Bone 5 stars, but that's not what I'm talking about. I just kind of want to preface it with that. I gave this one 4 stars. And I gave this one 4 stars because the first half of the book was really slow. You're kind of following where you picked up in the first book, obviously, but then you're kind of just building up for the third book, and I tend to find that in a trilogy that happens a lot for me, where I love the first book and love the last book, don't really love the one in between, because of the fact that you're trying to recover from the first one and then set up for the third. So I gave this one 4 stars. I really liked it. Still loved this book. Still thought it was really well done. Last half of the book, completely thrilling. Absolutely awesome. Leigh Bardugo is incredible. And we're going to talk more about her writing later on in this video, but I really enjoyed this. After reading the bit of fantasy that I had read, I wanted to pick up a cute contemporary romance, so I read 5 Feet Apart by Rachel Lipincott, Mickey Daughtry, and Tobias Eichnes. princess. We're gonna say Rachel Lipincott. So I had actually seen the movie before I read this book. I know, a big bookish sin, but I was in a huge reading slump when the movie came out and my sister wanted to see it. So I saw the movie first and then I read this book. And I really loved this book. I gave it 5 stars. I thought it followed the movie really well, and there were a few scenes that were included in this book that kind of set it apart from the movie in its own way, because obviously they can't include every single scene in the movie, but they included so much that the few scenes that they left out weren't like, oh, this would have been so much better if it was in the movie. Since they were in this book, you kind of got to learn a few more things about some of the characters in this story, and oh, it was just so good. I loved it so much. Highly recommend. So if you haven't seen the movie and you haven't read this book, and if you don't know what either of them are about, it follows our main character Stella, and she has cystic fibrosis. So she has gone back to the hospital because she had, I think, like a cold or something. And Stella's a bit of a control freak with every single thing she does because all she wants to do is live, and so she's very systematic with everything she does. She follows her treatments exactly because of the fact that her kind of life depends on it. And then she meets Will at the hospital, and he is there for a specialized treatment that they're testing out for cystic fibrosis, but he has Besapecia, which is a bacteria that is not good. So this story kind of follows them both in the hospital. Will is the complete opposite of Stella, and it's the story of them getting to know each other and falling in love and all of that. But the trick is that they have to stay 6 feet apart at all times due to transferring of like germs and bacteria and all that stuff with like cystic fibrosis. I don't know exactly how well this tied into cystic fibrosis and like the actuality of it. I've heard mixed things. I've heard it's like a really good representation of it and then like a not so good, kind of like romanticized. I'm not sure. But overall, as a story, really enjoyed this. It made me cry. I loved it so much. Would highly recommend. After that, I jumped right back into the Gracia-verse and read Ruin and Rising, which is the 3rd book in the Gracia trilogy, or the Shadow and Bone trilogy as it's now called. So this is the conclusion of our trilogy. We're kind of fixing everything up from books to 1 and 2, and it was so good. I loved the conclusion of this. I thought it was so good. Loved it, loved it, loved it. I do not love the ship that is in this. I'll just say it. And I'm not alone in that because I know multiple people have felt that way. But overall, very good. Loved it. Gave it 5 stars. Not going to talk too much about it because I already talked about it with Siege and Storm. And this video's already been long enough, so we're going to move right along. After that, I read Karvall, another library rental. So Caraval talks about this magical game that's held, and the master of Caraval has written to our main character, who I have forgotten the name of. In Caraval, we follow our main character Scarlet and her sister Tella, and they have never left the island in which they lived, and Scarlet is actually arranged to be married, and she doesn't really know her future husband, and that like isn't Tella's favorite thing. Scarlet is very live to appease her father and just get things done and make everybody happy, and Tella's very follow her passions and follow what she's excited about. And so it's kind of interesting to see their sister dynamic. I gave this book 4 stars. I thought this book was super interesting. I really enjoyed it. However, I did not love the writing style in parts of it. I struggled to get through it. Again, the beginning was slow. The ending just kind of was a little bit too perfect, and I can't talk about that because obviously, you know, spoilers. And I feel like that's the theme of this video. I'm gonna try and get better at like my synopses and reviews and things like that, but it just felt a little too like perfect. Like I wanted to see some like intense endings, and I don't know that I want to continue on with the second one just because I didn't love it. I don't know. I haven't decided yet if I'll continue on in the trilogy. We'll see, but overall I enjoyed reading it. I thought the actual game was really cool. Like once we got into the game I really enjoyed it, but that was like a third of it, and then like the ending was a third, and then like the beginning was a third. So I don't know. I really enjoyed it, thought it was interesting, but then at times I was just very frustrated with some of the characters. And yeah, that's all I really have to say on that. After that, I read another e-arc, and that was Orpheus Girl by Brynne Rebele-Henry. I believe that's how you pronounce the author's name, but I could be wrong. So this follows our main character, Raya. She's a young girl, and she lives in this small rural town in Texas, and the town is very conservative. She's always had this like connection with her best friend Sarah, and it was more than just like a friendship best friend connection. Like she felt very attracted to her, and she felt as though they were kind of like soulmates, you know? Raya lives with her grandmother because her mother has since abandoned her. She is obsessed with Greek mythology, and one day Her and Sarah are outed. Her grandmother sends her away to a conversion therapy camp. I didn't love this book. I gave it 2.5 stars. And the reason for that rating was I saw somebody else who identifies as LGBTQ+, and they had spoken about how some of the things in this book were very toxic and very, I don't want to say problematic because I don't like that word, but not good. I expected this to be a little bit more like cute romance, a little bit more Greek mythology, and that's not what I got. The majority of the novel talks about this conversion therapy that they're having to endure, and it's very graphic and very painful, and there are so many trigger warnings. I wrote a full-on review on this, and I mentioned some trigger warnings, and if you check out some other reviews by some LGBTQ+ people, they do talk about some of the trigger warnings there as well. But I will say there's sexual content, outing, obviously conversion therapy, including shock therapy, suicide, attempted suicide, and there's more that I'm probably not even remembering. Like, yes, it was meant to be a hard emotional read, but for me it was just a little bit too much and I didn't love it. And that's okay. I know some people really liked it, but it just didn't feel like, the synopsis of this book kind of seems like a triumphant, like, we're gonna save everybody and we're gonna end up in love and it's gonna be happy, but it doesn't do that. It's very negative throughout the entire book, and I was expecting like just some happiness in it, and I love a good sad book, but the synopsis of this just didn't match up with what the book was, and I think that's what happened with me, is that I went in thinking it was going to be one thing based on the synopsis, and I was giving something completely different. So that's all I really have to say on that. You can check out some more Goodreads reviews if you want to hear a little bit more in regards to that. I'll link some down below that I found interesting and that I kind of learned some stuff from in regards to this book, but that's just my opinion on it. It's not something that I'm going to be purchasing when it releases. And the publication date on this is October 8th of this year. Let's jump back into happy positive land, shall we? I think we shall. We're going to talk about one of my favorite reads for this month, and that is What If It's Us by Becky Albertalli and Adam Silvera. Oh my god, love this book so much. So this follows our two main characters, Arthur and Ben, and each author wrote a perspective. Okay. I love this book so much, can you tell? So Arthur and Ben have this kind of meet cute at the post office. Ben is delivering a box of his ex's things back to him, and Arthur is on a coffee run for his internship in New York, so that's where this book is set. Arthur just kind of like meets Ben and they're perfect. Like, I love this book so much. So they kind of have this meet cute, but then they lose connection. They never got each other's names or phone number, and so the first half of this book we are following Arthur and Ben as they're trying to reunite with one another after their meet cute at the post office, and this book was so good. It's a very modern novel. I particularly loved this book because when I saw that they were titling the book What If It's Us, I immediately thought of Dear Evan Hansen. I'm a huge Broadway fan, and I just kept thinking of Dear Evan Hansen because, like, the song What If It's Us, and that actually plays a part in this book. And Arthur loves Broadway and I love Broadway, and it was just so good, and the ending like wasn't too perfect. That was something I talked about with Caraval, is that the ending felt too perfect. The ending here did not feel too perfect. It was so sweet. It was about falling in love and also having a limited amount of time to do that because Arthur's only there for the summer. So it melted my heart. I love these characters so much. I highly recommend picking this one up. I think they did a great job, and this is going to be something that I keep on my shelves for a really long time. Obviously, I gave this one 5 stars. Duh. And back to books I didn't love too much. I gave Illuminae 3.5 stars. I know this is kind of like a cult classic right now. I didn't love it, and I think it's just because I don't like sci-fi. This was a very personal rating. I tried to like make it non-biased, but obviously it's gonna be biased because it's my rating about my reading experience and my enjoyment of it. So this is by Amie, Kaufman, and Kristoff, and it follows our main character, Katie. In the very beginning of this book, she breaks up with her boyfriend, Ezra, and then their planet is invaded, and they are separated onto 2 separate ships. It just wasn't my thing. The audiobook was freaking amazing. The sound effects, the cast, everything. The design of this book, the multimedia design of this book, amazing. Everything design and audiobook wise amazing. I just didn't love the story, and that's okay. I don't want to talk too much about this book because I want to spend more time on books that I really, really loved, and this just was not one of them, and that's okay. I would recommend it to anybody who likes sci-fi or this type of story. It just wasn't for me. I just don't think I'm a huge sci-fi fan. This was my first sci-fi novel, and I didn't love it, and that's okay. It wasn't meant for me. I'm gonna bundle the next two reads together because they're part of a duology, and that is the Six of Crows duology. So Six of Crows and Crooked Kingdom by Leigh Bardugo. So these books follow our gang, the Dregs, and there are 6 members of them, hence Six of Crows, and they are assigned to go on this heist. And this is also set in the Grishaverse, so we do get experience with a little bit of the powers that are discussed in the original trilogy. I talked about this in my vlogs, but I've heard that you don't have to read the original trilogy to read these. I'm gonna beg to differ on that, because I did find that in these 2 books, certain things were mentioned that did happen in the trilogy, and though they weren't like major plot points that were spoiled, there were certain like reveals that happened in the trilogy that were mentioned in here very casually. And it was kind of like an okay thing in this book, but in the trilogy it was like, oh my god, really? And then I found like a certain connection to some of the characters in here just because I had read the trilogy. I rated Six of Crows 5-star and Crooked Kingdom 4-star. I thought this one got off to a slower start. That tends just to happen with my ratings. If I rated a little bit lower, I either thought it started off slow or I didn't love the writing style of it. I love the writing style of both of these. I thought they were amazing. I really enjoyed them. I'm so glad I finally picked these up. I'm so glad I finished the trilogy so I could pick these up. I would highly recommend them. They were magical and intense and captivating, and I just loved them. I'm trying to make these a little bit quicker because I have a lot to get through. So if you want to hear more detailed thoughts about any of the books that I am reading, feel free to check out my vlogs from the Owl Readathon, where I talk about every book that I read in detail, and you get to see the journey of me reading it. We got 4 books left. Next up we have The Fault in Our Stars by John Green. I had initially read this book when I was in like 7th or 8th grade, and at the time, had you asked me what I would rate it on a scale of like 1 to 5, I would have given it a 5. And I am so happy to say that my rating still stands. I love this book. It's timeless. I love the characters. I still felt a connection to them this day. It melted my heart. I had forgotten some of the stuff that had happened in this book because it had been so long since I had read the book, and it's also been a really long time since I've seen the movie. So being able to pick this back up and like be immersed in the story of our main characters, just, it was so pretty. If you don't know what this book is about, it follows our main character Hazel, who has been diagnosed with cancer. She previously had a scare where she thought she was gonna die, and miraculously she's still alive, and so she's kind of on this journey of living and trying to live as best she can with her terminal diagnosis. Her mom suggests that she needs to go to support group because her mom thinks that she is depressed. So she goes to the support group, and one day she meets Augustus Waters, who is a friend of somebody she knows in the support group. It's kind of just like a quick infatuation, but Hazel's very hesitant because she knows she has this terminal diagnosis and she doesn't want to get connected to inevitably lose him or have him lose her. And it was just a super cute story. It made my heart melt. And I love how nothing is romanticized. Like, some of the stuff that happens in this book is very serious and very real from what I've heard. I know John Green did take a little bit of liberty when writing some of these things, but it was just really good. 2 days after I had finished this, if you don't know, like, Snapchat has these memories that come up. I got a memory of 2 years ago when I got to visit the bench that one of the scenes of the movie was filmed on. I'll insert a picture here of me sitting on the bench, and it just made me cry so much because I timed this read perfectly, even though I didn't know that that picture was coming up in my memories, and that was just kind of like a moment for me. But anyways, gave this 5-star, loved it so much, really enjoyed, would recommend. Next up we've got The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. I rated this 3 stars, 3.5, 3 stars, somewhere in that range. I had originally DNF'd this about a year or 2 ago, and I'm really glad I picked it back up. I finished it this time I enjoyed it. I just don't think this story is tailored for somebody like me. I couldn't really connect with the characters in this book just because they're so young and they're going through things that I really never like dealt with. And that's not to say that if I can't like see myself in a character that I don't like it, it just didn't really do it for me, and that was okay. I can see why this is a favorite amongst people. It just wasn't my favorite. It does talk about anxiety and the trials and tribulations of high school and liking people, and you know, it was well done. It just, I didn't love it, and that's all I really have to say on that. I don't know. I'm sure you know what this is about. It's a classic, so don't want to spend time on that because I still have so much to talk about. My next read was my first new adult romance, and that was Red, White, and Royal Blue by Casey McQuiston. Oh my god, love this book so much. Gave it 5 stars. It was incredible. This book follows our main characters, as you can see here on the cover. This is Alex. He is the son of the female United States president, and this is Prince Henry, who is in line to the throne of England. Oh my god, he's part of the royal family, and Alex has always considered Prince Henry his like sworn enemy, and he has to go to this royal wedding where obviously Prince Henry is, it's part of like their international affairs, and he can't stand him. And it's an enemies to lovers story. I love both of these characters so much. It was really good. I really loved all the representation and diversity of this book. Alex identifies as bisexual. Prince Henry identifies as gay. Alex is the son of a Mexican immigrant, I believe, and so he's biracial, and the president's obviously female, and there was so much good representation in this book, and I really, really loved it. It was a really cute romance. I highly recommend it. Every single page of this book was very interesting. There wasn't a moment where I felt it was slow. There wasn't a moment where I was like, oh, I would have done that differently. Like, it was just really good, and I highly recommend it. So if you haven't picked this one up yet, I would highly recommend it. However, I will say that it's not for everyone. It does have a bit of mature content in it, and if you are not of an age where you are comfortable with that, or in general you're just not comfortable with that, I wouldn't recommend it. But if you kind of go in knowing that there is going to be some more mature content in the book, then I think you'll be okay, and I think you'll really like it. So I would recommend. And my last read of this month I actually finished last night, and that was A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas. This is my first Sarah J. Maas read, and I had heard that this one was worse than A Court of Mist and Fury. I've heard she's always better with the latter books in her series, and I was very pleasantly surprised by this. So this is kind of like a Beauty and the Beast retelling. And I really liked how it was very subtle in terms of Beauty and the Beast. It wasn't very like, hey, this is a Beauty and the Beast retelling. Like, it was very subtle when it did that. So it follows our main character, Feyre, who is very poor. She once had a large fortune with her family, but upon her mother's passing and her father's downward spiraling mental health as well as his physical health, they are left very poor, and Feyre is left to scavenge for food and chop wood and do all these things to make her family get by. And she's out hunting one day, and she ends up killing a wolf who happens to be a shape-shifted fairy, and then she gets taken away to the world of the fairies, and it's beautiful. I thought it was really, really well done, and I really loved the subtlety of the Beauty and the Beast tie-ins. I thought it was so good. It was a little bit of a slower start, and I kind of had heard that before going into it, so I did kind of expect that, so it didn't dock my rating too much, but I did end up giving this 4.5 stars. I would highly recommend it. I really enjoyed it. If you haven't read it already, you should. Don't put it off for as long as I did. Whew. That's everything I read this month. Holy cow. I read 15 books this month. So now that we've talked about all of the books that I read this month, I'm going to go into a couple of the statistics of the books that I read. So the shortest book I read was Stage Dreams at 104 pages, and not so surprisingly, the longest book I read was Illuminae at 602 pages. My average rating was a 4.23. The average page number that I read was 361.87. All of the books I read this month, if my math is correct, a total page count of 5,428 pages. My god, that's a lot of pages. I read a lot this month. I'm really proud of that. So that's pretty much all I have for this video. thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Within the next couple days, you'll be seeing my July TBR, so stick around for that. I hope you enjoyed this month's wrap-up. I hope it was interesting. I know I had a lot to talk about, and I know some of the synopses were a little bit iffy, but I tried my best. All that being said, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video. Happy reading!